Generation Nurse. I am normally joined by my co-host, Mike Chiavolino, and Mike has something else more important he had to do today, which I just can't even imagine what that is, but unfortunately, he's not able to be with us today. And the Talent Brand Show podcast is the only podcast that is dedicated to recruitment, retention, and engagement of talent in the healthcare world. We are very fortunate today to have as our guest Dr. Renee Thompson, RN. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about her before we continue our conversation. So, Dr. Renee Thompson is an international speaker and consultant, and she tackles professional challenges facing healthcare leaders today. With 29 years as a clinical nurse, nurse educator, and nurse executive, Dr. Thompson is an internationally recognized expert on creating a healthy workforce by eradicating workplace bullying and incivility. She's in demand as a keynote speaker, hosts an award-winning blog, has won numerous awards, and is author of several popular books on bullying and professional development. And I want to hear more about that at the end of our interview. Dr. Renee Thompson is the CEO and founder of Healthy Workforce Institute and works with healthcare organizations to cultivate a professional workforce by addressing workplace bullying and incivility. She is one of only 26 nurses in the world who has achieved the prestigious Certified Speaking Professional designation. I'm one of them. And in 2018 was recognized as one of LinkedIn's top 10 voices in healthcare for her contribution to their global online healthcare community. Very impressive. Welcome, Renee.
Well, thank you, Donna. And I'm sorry that I don't have the opportunity to talk with Mike, but I'm thrilled for the opportunity to talk with you today.
Yes, wonderful. And Mike would love to speak with you at another time. And of course, he'll watch the interview. So he's a great guy. Definitely good to talk with him offline another time. So Renee, you and I, in addition to that wonderful bio, you and I have known each other professionally, personally for many years through our membership in both the National Speakers Association and the National Nurses in Business Association. I just wanted to add that in. And you and I are both on the advisory board for the National Nurses in Business Association and longtime members. And both, as I alluded to in your intro, we're both long-term members of National Speakers Association and RNs who are certified speaking professionals. So we have a lot in common, but those are just a couple of the things I thought I would mention before we got started.
Yes, I've known you for quite a while, and you were one of the first people that I actually reached out to, and I wanted to start my own business, and I went to some of your seminars, and they were just incredibly motivating and practical. There were practical tips on how to start your own, speaking business, consulting business. And so I knew right away that we were going to be friends and colleagues.
Absolutely. And thanks for sharing that too. That's wonderful to hear. So Renee, you say that bullying and incivility are prevalent in healthcare, and tell us why, but I'd like you to also address what bullying actually is, because I know it's a big problem, but a lot of people throw the word bullying around all the time. Like if somebody snaps at them, they're like, oh, I'm being bullied. So I think it's really important to understand, because bullying is something that's very serious. I think it's important to understand exactly what that is. So tell us about that and why it's so prevalent in healthcare, please.
Sure. Well, we actually see more bullying in healthcare, or I should say disruptive behaviors in healthcare more than any other industry in the world. And when you think about that, it doesn't make sense. I mean, we're in the caring business, yet we see more disruptive behaviors in healthcare. But Donna, you know this. Think about the incredible stress that we're under in healthcare. Can you imagine this year, the amount of stress that healthcare employees are under is, we've never had this much stress in our careers in our entire lifetimes. So when we see people who are stressed out and burned out, they lash out. And so we see more disruptive behaviors in healthcare because of that increase in stress that we have, the life and death situations, the unpredictability of patient care. We all remember being that bedside nurse when we walk into work and we think, all of a sudden our stable patient is the one that crashes, and the patient we've been worried about our entire shift is fine. You just can never predict what'll happen. And again, when people are really stressed out, they don't always behave well. And the other reason that we see more disruptive behaviors in healthcare is because we've normalized bad behavior. We say things all the time like, well, that's just her personality. You know, she's a really great nurse, or this person is a good fill in the blank. Just don't ask them any questions because they don't like people very much. I mean, we've been normalizing deviant behaviors for decades. We justify someone's bad behavior just because they're so good at what they do. And so we've created a culture now where we don't even notice disruptive behaviors. We've just accepted them as the norm. And as you pointed out, Donna, we tend to label all bad behavior as bullying, and that's not accurate. And when we label every behavior we don't like as bullying, we truly do a disservice, because if you can actually show that somebody's bullying another employee, or a manager is bullying, you know, one of their employees, or vice versa, that's a serious matter that needs to be addressed in a different way. So I'll get clear on what bullying is and what bullying is not.
Thank you.
There's, first of all, no legal definition for bullying in this country. We have a legal definition for harassment and discrimination, but not for bullying. But the agreed upon definition is that bullying is when we look at bullying, it is looking at disruptive behaviors with the conscious or unconscious attempt to do harm. So when somebody reaches out to me and they say, I'm being bullied, I always respond by saying, okay, you know, let's unpack this. What I'm looking for is there needs to be a target. So let's say, Donna, for some reason, I don't like you and you're my coworker. And every time I have to give you shift report, I, leave something out so I can set you up to fail. Or when you're giving me shift report, I will nitpick you to death. I'm fine with everybody else. It's just you that I have a problem with. So there has to be a target. The behavior has to be harmful in some way. So if I roll my eyes at you, is that really harmful? Well, by itself, it's not. And we tend to label even eye rolling bullying. But again, if I don't give you the information that you need to care for that patient, now that's harm. And it has to be repeated over time. It can't be one time I get testy with you because I'm in a crisis situation. So that's what bullying is. What we see on the flip side, and this is way more common, is incivility. You know, I'll go into organizations and determine whether or not there's bullying, incivility, if there's something else. And what I find is actually not a lot of bullying. I mean, it's there, but it's not as prevalent as what I would call incivility. That's that low level, rude, disrespectful, gossiping, the eye rolling, the mocking, being condescending. And if you look at bullying, you actually have a way to address that. You usually have some type of policy that makes it very clear on how bullying is addressed. But Donna, incivility, that's not so easy. Incivility is culture. And you know this, it's not as easy to change culture.
Right. So Renee, give us some examples of how this disruptive behavior, whatever level it might take, impacts the organization and the workplace.
Yes, huge impact. When we take a look at when bullying and even incivility, it's not just bullying. When disruptive behaviors go unaddressed, there's an incredible negative impact to individuals, the organization itself, and we take a look at the negative impact to patients. Study after study shows the negative impact disruptive behaviors have on patient outcomes. There's a really great study from Johns Hopkins that showed, 71% of nurses and physicians have linked incivility to medical error. 27% of them said it led to a patient's death. And 99% of physicians and nurses believe bad behavior leads to bad patient outcomes. And I know, if you're focused on retention, well, if you're not addressing your bad behavior, the good employees are not going to stay. And we know this. There are so many studies out there, and there's such a wide range of percentages on nurses who quit because of bullying and incivility. It's anywhere from, I've seen it as low as 30% and as high as, 65%. And when you think about it, a lot of people, when they leave, they're not going to admit that they're leaving because they're being bullied. They'll use some other excuse. So some organizations might not even realize that the reason that they're losing people is because of disruptive behaviors. And I just had a call today with a client who was telling me that they were using some travel nurses. And she had a travel nurse that said, I don't care if I'm getting premium pay. Today's going to be my last day because I can no longer work here because of the bullying that I've been experiencing. And it breaks my heart. But we know it's happening.
And, we've had a lot of guests where we've talked about the issue of culture, which of course is so important. We've had them on the show, and very often so much focus is just on lassoing someone to come into the organization. We spend, they spend time, effort, attention there with sign-on bonuses and a lot of other things, and just really working on getting people in, but not paying a lot of attention to the culture there and keeping people there, and all the money that it costs to the dollar amount to get to hire a new person and train them and recruit them, and then to not be focused on other things just doesn't, well, first of all, it doesn't make any sense from an administrative standpoint, but that's not even the most important point. Obviously, even more important is your workforce and patient care ultimately, which is what the industry is all about.
Yes, I used to work, I had a corporate position before I left to start my own company, and I shared a space with the director of nursing recruitment. And I had this aha moment the one day. They kept bragging about how many nurses they hired that year, and we hired 780 nurses. And then the next year, we hired 900 nurses. And I thought to myself, why do you need to hire so many nurses every single year? It's because you can get them in, as you absolutely said, Donna, sign-in bonuses and all these, bells and whistles. But if you don't create a culture, an environment where they feel supported, they will leave you. And you're right, there is that human, emotional attachment to, the nurses who are coming in, and they think this is going to be a job where they can feel that they can be successful and feel good about the work that they do. And for them to feel like they have no choice but to leave, that's painful.
Yeah, it is. I know from being in the business so long too, one bad experience like that it doesn't just necessarily drive a nurse away from that employer. It can sometimes drive nurses completely out of the profession as well, and just leave such a bad feeling with people too when you have that experience. Yes. So what are some strategies that Healthy Workforce Institute can help employers implement to reduce all of this?
When I started this work, I really focused on nurse to nurse, because that's, was my experience being a nurse. But then I realized over time that instead of focusing on nurse to nurse, which we still do, and we share some strategies, but our focus right now is on equipping leaders with the skills and tools that they need to address disruptive behaviors. Because, I had an experience many years ago where I was a frontline nurse manager. I was new to leadership, new to the organization. And I found out after a few weeks that I was now the manager of a department that had the worst reputation out of the entire 700-bed hospital. Oh, and that I was the sixth manager in 6 years. I mean, did they tell me that when they interviewed me? No. Donna, I have never seen such horrific, unprofessional, disturbing behaviors in my entire life. And honestly, I had no idea how to address them. And I lasted 14 months, but then I quit. I just couldn't do it. And for years, I felt like a failure. Oh. And as I got older and wiser, as we get older, we start realizing that, oh, wait a minute here. I wasn't a failure. I just wasn't equipped. And I vowed to make sure that no other leader felt like a failure. like I did. And so we focus a lot on equipping the leaders with the simple tools and skills that they need to set behavioral expectations and hold people accountable. And we do that through a variety of ways. I mean, we have a plethora of ways that we work with leaders and their organizations, but really, Donna, it's teaching them how to have honest conversations with their staff. You know, I find that leaders are afraid to tell their most clinically excellent nurse that they're toxic. Yeah. And, you know, and how do you get crystal clear on what the behaviors are so that you can address them? And so we do a lot of confronting techniques. I'm big on scripting. I swear scripting is my superpower.
Just explain what scripting means for someone who might not understand what that means.
Sure. I'm sure every single one of us at some point has been in a situation where maybe a coworker yelled at us, criticized us in front of other people, or embarrassed us in front of other people. And if you're all like me, in the moment, I do not know what to say. But the next day in the shower, I can think of all sorts of things to say. So this is where scripting is really helpful. So what I recommend you do is identify the types of behaviors that you're experiencing. It could be from a coworker, it could be from a peer. If you're a manager, it could be from an employee, or if you're a manager, it could be from your director. And I have a lot of scripts that people can use, but you look at the script and then you practice it. So here's one of my favorite ones that we use a lot. This happens frequently where you're in the middle of a conversation and somebody's really rude to you. They yell, they criticize, they say something inappropriate and unprofessional. It's for you to do this symbol, like time out here. The way you're talking to me right now is not okay. Or, you know, excuse me, but, you know, you just yelled at me, or and we do a lot of naming techniques too. You're yelling at me. I just saw you roll your eyes at me. It's another confronting technique that we just name the behavior. I'm offended by what you just said to me. Is a great one for you to use if somebody says something really rude to you. It's great for you to then in the moment know what to say instead of getting flustered like many of us do.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other tips that you could give some leaders on how to confront disruptive behavior in their department? Because really that is, you know, having had a number of healthcare leadership positions myself, that's not something that most of us are ever taught, probably still not taught that. And yet it is, not only is it one of the most detrimental things in the workplace, it's definitely one of the hardest things, I think, for any leader, even a leader who's maybe been given some training on this. It's one of the hardest things that we ever have to deal with. And I think a lot of people just avoid it because they don't know what to do. And it's just so hard.
Exactly. And I find this all the time where, let's say the executive leaders, they start to realize that there is a problem and that it is impacting the retention, it's impacting patient outcomes. And they'll just gather all of their frontline leaders together and say, that's it, you have to start addressing bad behavior. They'll go do it. How are they supposed to do that? And I know that the leaders that we work with, they basically want to know, what do I say to this person? What do I do? Because it's not easy, and you know, it's not intuitive. And I want to give the listeners 2 tips based on 2 of the most common mistakes leaders make. Good. And one of them is, let's say you're at a huddle, you're doing a huddle, and the charge nurse is leading the huddle. You're standing sort of off to the side, you're the manager, and somebody is really rude. Maybe it's the charge nurse or it's somebody else who is rude and says, well, I'm not taking that patient. It's not my turn. And how come? Okay, they start arguing. The manager, this is what most of them do. Oh, I don't want to say anything right now because I don't want to embarrass her, or it could be a him. But I'm going to talk to her later about, you know, that wasn't really right, the way she treated her. Here's the problem with that, Donna. If you say nothing, everybody else thinks it's okay. They're not mind readers. They don't know that you plan on talking to her. And this is where, again, you can confront in a way that stops the behavior, sets the tone that we don't talk like that to each other here, by, you know, doing a little timeout sign and then saying, timeout, we don't talk like this here, or, you know, the way you're talking right now is incredibly unprofessional and disruptive. You need to stop. but it's addressing it in the moment, not planning on. And now this is something that you can go and talk to that person after too. Highly recommend that. Like, okay, we're going to talk after, but in front of everybody, you have to address it. So that's one of the mistakes. They don't say anything. They wait until later. The other issue that comes up a lot, let's say somebody's behaving in a way that is unprofessional, inappropriate. Well, I'll give you an easy example. This actually happened with one of my leaders. He told me that 3 of his employees kept coming into work late every day, and it was in an interventional radiology department. And so it kind of delayed cases a little bit because everybody needed to be there. And he called me and said, I was going to bring this up at our staff meeting. Would that be okay? And I said, is everybody coming into work late? And he says, no, it's just these 3. I said, here's the deal. If you only have 1, 2, 3 employees who are behaving a certain way, whether it's, you know, coming in late or some type of behavioral issue, please don't address it at a staff meeting. That's a passive way. That's a coward way. You will lose credibility with your employees because everybody's sitting around saying, we know it's not us, it's these 3 people, and that you didn't have the courage to address it with those people.
And I think the other people would get resentful also if they're kind of being told, you know, you better not be late and this and that, when they're the ones that are always on time or early and doing the right thing. You know, go ahead. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I always think, do not disrespect my time. Yeah. You know, if I'm showing up on time every day, why do I have to listen to you complaining or telling us that we have to all come in on time when we know it's only these 2 or 3 people?
Right. Yeah. I remember years ago, I just can't help thinking of this story just along the same lines. I was working in a hospital. I was a department director. There was a huge snowstorm. My department was not an essential department. We were not direct caregivers in my department. So I and a few other directors let our staff go home, not real early, but, you know, maybe an hour early just to get out before rush hour. And then everybody got read the riot act after that because they said there should have been, you know, official permission and all. And I said to my boss, I didn't say it at the meeting, but I said it later. I said, okay, what about the people that didn't show up at all that day because there was a snowstorm predicted? We all came into work. My whole team came into work. And, you know, so I think you're kind of talking to the wrong people. And this wasn't a case of incivility. It certainly was, to me, a case of it was disruptive in a way, but it's just a perfect example of reading the riot act to everybody when there were only a few people who really did the wrong thing. So not a perfect example, but again, just that sort of thing happens. We have to think of that as a leader. I also remember a fellow department director when I worked in that hospital who had an employee who was very disruptive, very rude. And I spoke to him one day because it was impacting my department and the people that had to interact with him. And I, you know, talked to him one-on-one about it. And he said to me, that's not my job as a director. He said, I've got a job to do. I've got a lot of responsibility. I can't be bothered taking time to sit down and talk to him. I said, no, that is part of your responsibility as a leader. But I said, because if you've got one person that's creating problem, you've got all these wonderful people doing their job every day, and you're not doing anything about that. It's kind of insulting to the rest of them.
Sure, there's a ripple effect of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you bring up a really great point. There is a difference between seeing yourself as in management, as they say, or being a leader. A manager is just looking at, here's a list of things that I have to do. And it's all these administrative tasks. Being a leader is stepping up and looking at your group as a team and how do you cultivate a strong, cohesive team. And that involves having the courage to address somebody's disruptive behaviors, knowing the ripple effect, the negative ripple effect that has on the entire team. Oh boy.
Definitely. And you talked early too about how we normalize things and how, you know, we excuse them, we let them go. That certainly has been going on for a long time. And as a leader, it certainly was never easy for me to confront someone when there was a problem, but it's amazing how it will change people's behavior very often when they're called on what they're doing. Because as you said, if nobody ever says anything to them, what motivation is there for them
Right.
to change? And sometimes I think people are, I don't mean that they maybe aren't aware that they're being nasty and rude, but maybe sometimes they're not completely cognizant of the impact they really are having on other people in the department. So just giving that feedback to them, I think that can be helpful. At least it's a point of maybe a start of a point of
Hmm.
self-reflection. And, I've had a few times in my life where people have called me out on
Hmm.
something. And there were a few times that maybe I could have said, yes, I get it. I was out of line. I was rude. That response was inappropriate. There were other times though that I think I really was not aware that my behavior or my
Hmm.
language or whatever it was that I said or did was offensive or off-putting to people. And really, it's never easy to hear, but it was a wonderful opportunity for self growth for me to become more self aware. We don't always see ourselves as others do. So we can be
Yeah.
doing people a great service by calling them out on their behavior one way or another.
You are so right, Donna. It's something that we actually focus on, and all of the work that we do is that increasing that self-awareness. Because again, as I said right from the beginning, you've got to heighten awareness of disruptive behaviors, because you can't expect people to adapt their behaviors if they're not even aware. And I know people will say, how could she not realize that she is so rude or intimidating? Well, if nobody has ever sat down and had an honest conversation with that person, they think it's okay and they see themselves as maybe just being direct. And I just tell
Right,
people the
exactly.
way it is. And
Exactly,
meanwhile,
exactly. Yeah,
they don't realize it's disruptive. And
yeah.
it's interesting. We have this whole system that we put departments through with their leader and their teams. It's called our Department Culture Change Initiative. And we take them through a series of phases. And one of the phases, we get really clear on establishing a process for addressing disruptive behaviors. And we pull in HR and we look at disciplinary action, and we look at their policies and all of that good stuff. And I always preface the beginning of this work by saying our goal is not to go down the disciplinary path, because that's a whole lot of time and energy.
Mhm.
Okay. And it's always a challenge for leaders when they have to go down that path.
Mm.
The goal is to intervene early by having honest conversations with people, with your employees, if you're in a leadership role.
Mhm.
It's being honest with somebody and approaching a nurse and saying, you know what, this is what I heard happened yesterday. I don't know if it's true.
Mhm.
However, you and I are going to have this conversation, because if it is, it's not okay. Instead of saying, oh, I don't have all the information, I've got to do this investigation. And then six
Yeah,
months later, you know what? I'll just wait. And,
yeah.
and we have seen this time and time again. If you have an honest conversation with somebody early, soon
Mhm.
after when an incident happened, like 72 hours early,
Mhm.
most often you don't actually have to go down that disciplinary path,
Mm. Mhm.
because they may get reactive at first, defensive. It's pretty
Mhm.
normal, but then they'll come back and say, you know what, you're right, and I'm sorry, and I thank you for being honest with me, because it's painful when somebody tells you something that's not perfect about yourself.
Yeah.
But you know what, that's
Mhm.
how we grow.
Well, I think you make another important point because, again, having been in leadership roles myself, I think sometimes we might use that disciplinary path as an excuse
Hmm.
not to take ownership, not to put ourselves in that leadership role, and right away just try to put it into, well, I have to write you up, three strikes and you're out.
Hmm.
Having the conversation, and even in some cases an opportunity to coach. Again, I've been around for a long time. We often see things from our own perspective, but I have learned, and I continue to learn as I go on, that everybody was raised in a different way. People
Hmm.
have different home life. They have different struggles right now in their life.
Right.
So we often just expect everybody to behave as we see what we think is proper behavior, but in other words, compassion can be part of that also. And so, um, just creating, at least giving it a try to, like you say, have that conversation, confront them, let them know that you observed it, talk about it. And maybe there is, sometimes just calling people out, I think, can help them, as we said, to be self-reflective and change their behavior. But very often, and this is certainly always the role of a leader,
Right.
to give people the opportunity to give them some feedback, some constructive ideas of how they might do things differently next time. And
Right.
we maybe just, again, I think sometimes we as leaders just expect people to behave as what our standard is of proper behavior, and how to speak to people. But they may never have really been under working with someone who has looked at them in a certain way and given them the opportunity to improve themselves. I think, in other words, sometimes we just want to kick people out when they don't
Yes.
behave well, and we don't want to really give them an opportunity to improve. Not
Right.
certainly not everybody, but I can see that happening sometimes, because as you're talking, I can't help reflecting on my own years as
Right.
a healthcare leader and different things that happen. So great conversation. So you brought up HR, human resources, earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and we have a lot of our listeners are recruiters and HR people. And HR, years ago, HR was just kind of hiring, screening, and benefits administration. But HR plays such a key role in any healthcare organization today. So, talk a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
if you can, about the interaction between HR and leadership related to everything that we're talking about today.
I would love to talk about HR, because what we find is that there is a disconnect between leadership and HR. And the leaders tell me, especially the frontline leaders, I finally decide that's enough. I'm going to do something about this employee who's been bullying people for decades. Okay. They go to HR and then they tell me, I go to HR and, I hit a brick wall. HR says, well, did you counsel them? How many times did you counsel them? Oh, only 5 times. Oh, you need to counsel them 17 times before we can do anything. And, did you document? Did you cross all your T's and cross all your T's and dot all your I's? I hit a brick wall. Well, Donna, I'd say about 40% of the people who reach out to us for help are from HR. So I've spent a lot of time with HR, and HR representatives tell me, I have a frontline leader barges into my office demanding that I approve a termination. There's no documentation. I've never heard about this employee. And when I look at their performance reviews, I see meets or exceeds expectations for the last 25 years, and they want me to approve a termination. Everything we do when we work with organizations, we insist that HR is an equal partner at the table. We create a healthy workforce committee, and HR sits at the table with leaders, with employees, and we sit down and we take a look at strategies. They're a part of it. One of my favorite things to do is when I work with the leaders, the first thing they do in this phase is they invite their HR business partner to meet for coffee. And the leader talks about their intentions of trying to cultivate and sustain a more professional workforce culture, and that they want them as partners in addressing disruptive behaviors. So together they come up with a plan. Obviously I have guides for all of this. And it's basically the types of behaviors that manager is experiencing from their employees, and what behaviors they plan to start addressing first. And then what's the process? So the first is always, what we call a coffee conversation with an employee. If you have to have the same conversation again, now it's counseling. If you have to have a third conversation, this might be when I pick up the phone and call my HR business partner and say, hey, heads up, this is my third conversation. But it's the manager and their HR representative having that conversation and making those decisions as partners. Because what they don't understand is they each view healthcare through a different lens.
Yeah.
HR is always going to be more risk averse because they're looking at protecting the organization and the overall employee. So I think we need to do a better job, Donna, and really bridging that gap between leadership and HR. We're on the same team, but we don't always act like we are.
Yeah. And the topic of partnerships has come up a lot in my presentations and conversations I'm having lately. And we live and work in such a complex world, which seems to be getting more complex all the time. And, maybe the old standard from decades ago was that, you did it yourself, you whatever, you had to find all the answers and all the solutions. But today it's really all about partnership and collaboration. And as you say, they look at things from a different lens, but that's good because
Right.
my blind spot, hopefully they're going to, cover me on that, and vice versa, because I may be right there in the day-to-day working with that individual, or at the bedside, or whatever the workplace is. So partnerships are not just nice, they're absolutely vital today. And again, we're talking about saving lives and maintaining the health and wellness of the planet here in healthcare. So it's
Absolutely.
definitely a team sport, no question about it. That's
Yes.
fabulous. So speaking of leaders too, Renee, in terms of leadership development, are we doing a good job, or what kind of a job are we doing equipping leaders today with the tools and the strategies that they need to deal with disruptive behavior in the workplace
Well,
in terms of leadership training?
we haven't found one organization yet that does a good job providing their leaders, especially their frontline leaders, with the skills and tools that they need to set behavioral expectations and hold their employees accountable. And what we find are a lot of complementary topics and some developments. Of course, you bring in a new leader and you're going to get all of here's the job itself, the tasks, the audits, how you manage a department. But when it comes to leadership, even though I do see things such as crucial conversations and speed of trust, and you have some of these topics, they're one and dones. It's as though, okay, go to this 4-hour workshop and then you check a checkbox. And, a lot of times when I first started doing this work, a lot of organizations, that's what they would have me do. They come, bring me in, do a 4-hour workshop on bullying and incivility, and then they check their checkbox. And I started realizing, Donna, that you can't just bring a group of leaders together in 4 hours and expect them to know how to deal with disruptive behaviors. I mean, this human behavior is so complex. You have to provide ongoing education and training. And, we have some ways that we do that, but it's all the bite-sized learnings and trainings that you provide to your team, your leaders over time. It can't just be when they're new, and it can't just be once a year, because they need the help. As I said, human behavior is so complex. And then sometimes there's some other additional complexities. If you're a frontline leader and your nurses are represented by a very strong union, that adds a whole other layer of complexity to the issue of holding people accountable. And so, yeah, we don't do a great job equipping them.
Yeah, well,
trying to change that, though.
Yeah, well, that's good. And another good point. I think we're often just trying to outsource everything, and really it's just wanting somebody else to fix the problem without
Right.
taking any ownership or responsibility for it. So, with all that said, Renee, how do you and your organization work with clients? Can you give us an idea of what that looks like? And I know that there's a lot of things that you offer. If one went to your website, there are courses, there's coaching, all kinds of things going on. So tell us more about that.
Sure. As you said, we have lots of different ways, from just a 1-hour presentation, which really the goal with that, a keynote or even a workshop, is to heighten awareness. I had somebody say to me once, after I went in and did a workshop, they said, okay, we had a wound that we didn't know we had. It was covered by a Band-Aid that we didn't see was even there. In 3.5 hours, you exposed the Band-Aid, ripped it off, and we saw the wound that we had, because then that gives them the ability to start, addressing these behaviors. But when we look at changing culture and we look at an organization as a whole, we always start with step one. And step one is you've got to address disruptive behaviors. And there are ways that we do that. As you mentioned, Donna, we have an online academy, and our first program is called Eradicating Bullying and Incivility: Essential Skills for Healthcare Leaders. It is this is what I say to this employee. Okay. This is what I do. This is how I document. You would be surprised. Leaders aren't taught how to document in a way that increases their chance of actually holding that employee accountable if they need to go down that path. So we put all of that together. We do it either in person or we do this in our online program. In our online program, we get together with all the leaders in the program for live calls. We talk about how they can apply these principles, and they're very practical. That's what everybody tells me, that they're so practical. They're not up in the clouds. They're say this, do that. So we start with that. That's always step one. Step two is,
and gosh, those basics sometimes are what people need more than anything.
well, if you can learn you're right, it's the basics, how to address disruptive behaviors. It's easy to address it when you see it, even though we're not always doing that. But then what do you do if you don't actually witness it? We have strategies for how to deal with that. Okay. It's if you don't witness it, you do this. And that's everything that we have in that program. And then once that leader gets pretty clear on how to address disruptive behaviors, then the second step is looking at transforming your culture. And that's where we take them through this 4-phase process. And this is where we heighten awareness. We do baseline assessments. I have a validated tool that can serve as a data point for you, especially organizations that are on the magnet journey. You know, you got to have your 3 data points. Yeah. And so we provide that for you. We do the survey baseline and then 6 months and 1 year after we start the program. But then it's getting crystal clear on behavioral expectations in that department. So we actually pull the whole team together and we ask the question, how do we always want to treat each other in this space? How do we never want to treat each other? And then we form what we either call department norms or professional practice agreement. And then we provide this skill development for them to know actually how to honor that commitment. And then we hardwire healthy workforce best practices into the very fabric of that organization. So we do this again, Donna, you know, we do education and development. We have our online programs. We do consulting where we're doing a lot of leadership coaching, hip to hip with the leaders and their teams. I'm tired. It's a lot of work, but it's so worth it, especially when you see cultures transform. Yeah.
And so it's just, it's another level of partnering, as we were just discussing the importance of that too.
Yes.
Because it's so easy in any leadership role to get caught up in the day-to-day work that you're doing, and you know, not having the tools, not knowing what to do, but having the ongoing support that you're talking about. You know, certainly there's value in having maybe one program to get started, but you're offering a lot of training for the staff. You're offering coaching and ongoing support, because obviously if there's a culture problem or a big problem, it's not something that's going to be solved with one program. It's something that an organization, I would suspect, needs to make a longer term commitment to get to what needs to be done, and then to get into that groove for a while.
Yes, I actually had, because we involve the physicians, we involve everyone. And I was the chief medical director of an organization I was doing this work. Gosh, we were there for a couple of years. And he's like, oh, I get it. So you have a top down, bottom up, and everything in approach to culture change. And I looked at him and I said, yes, that's exactly what we do. We really involve everyone, because you're right. Especially when you're looking at culture change, it doesn't happen overnight. And even this, you know, second step where we do this culture change initiative, it's a 6 to 1 year program. And I think the benefit, and you mentioned this, Donna, about, you know, even some of the coaching. My favorite thing that happens is when a leader that's involved in this work with us texts me and says, I'm in a situation. Do you have any time for me to talk about it with you? Donna, there were so many times that I thought, oh, thank goodness they called me, because they were about to handle it in a way that was not good. But just to know that there's somebody.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. How valuable is that, really? Oh my gosh.
They need help.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up though, because that in itself is incredibly valuable. And so, Renee, you've written a number of books on the subject. Tell us about your latest book, and all your books if you care to?
Yes. Sure. I know they say if you want to be credible and you really want to get your message out there, if you really want to make a difference, you need to write it down so that other people can learn from you beyond what I can do as a speaker. And so my first book was called Do No Harm Applies to Nurses Too: Strategies to Protect and Bully Proof Yourself at Work. And this was really related to the research that I did in my DMP program, where I looked at trying to protect new nurses as they entered into professional practice, and looking at their first job and equipping them with the skills and tools that they need to, like I said, protect themselves. And then when I really started looking at the role of the leader, I had wanted to write a book for leaders for probably 5 years. And Donna, I don't know how you write so many books. You're a great writer. And it just seems like, and to the outside world, people think, oh, it must come natural for you just to write all these books. And I know it's not that simple, but it took me, I think, 5 years before I actually said, I'm going to sit and write a book for leaders. And this is, it was my heart and soul poured into this. And it's called Enough, Eradicate Bullying and Incivility in Healthcare, Strategies for Frontline Leaders. I wrote this book for my former self when I was that leader.
Oh, wonderful.
Because the first chapter is my story. And I wrote that book for me, 15 years ago. It's all of my strategies for how a leader can not only address disruptive behaviors, but truly cultivate a more professional, respectful workforce culture.
Wonderful. Thank you. And the book is available everywhere, I presume?
It's available on my website and on Amazon right now.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Anything else you'd like to tell us or share with us about you, your work, upcoming events, anything?
Well, the work that I do right now, obviously, we've been seeing even throughout this last year, an uptick in disruptive behaviors. And as I said earlier on, when people are burned out and stressed out, they tend to lash out. Those of you who are listening, I just want to remind you of something, that even though we may understand why people right now, especially in healthcare, are acting out, I mean, they're burned out and really having a hard time coping with it, especially as we see cases rising. Even though you understand it, you still have to address it. And there's an easy way to do that. It's to say to people, I understand you can be angry, you can be frustrated, you can be scared, all those things, but you can't be cruel. And it's really, about trying to cultivate this culture of kindness and caring. And you can't do that if you're ignoring your bad behavior. So I'll end with my famous line that I say all the time. It's that the way we treat each other is just as important as the care that we provide. And I thank you for the opportunity to share this with your listeners.
Oh, absolutely. And Renee, please tell everybody how they can get in touch with you.
Yes. Well, you can just go to my website. It's healthyworkforceinstitute.com. Some people try to find me on the Healthy Workplace Institute, but that doesn't exist. It's the healthyworkforceinstitute.com.
Okay. Well, Renee, thank you so much for your time, expertise. I really enjoyed the conversation. Such an important subject, especially right now, but always. And we're really grateful to you for being a guest on the show today. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me here, Donna.
Excellent. And you have been listening to the Talent Brand Show podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you